this kind of a look at it, it's pretty easy to see that it has lobes. And between those lobes, if you press this one to the left here, it's right, or my left, to the side, and it breaks, that's okay. You know, pieces do happen to break off, because it gets quite brittle. You can help, I'll share.
Okay, thanks.
Anyway, that gives you a look at the gallbladder. Now, in this one, the gallbladder is kind of tucked in here, and it almost looks the same as the liver, but most of you are going to find that the gallbladder has a kind of a whitish appearance to it. It really stands out pretty well, and a good many of the mink you have, you don't even have to press this to the side. It'll stick out in there and be visible. This one here is just a little bit camouflaged back in there. From the liver, there's a tube that goes down into the digestive plumbing. You may or may not see that. It's kind of buried in connective tissue. I can kind of snag some of it here. I'll use the word common bile duct right now, and if you get a chance, maybe you'll see it that way. It's a good idea when you're doing this kind of stuff to do this kind of thing, so that you can, because you do so much damage in the process, you almost have to kind of pay attention on the fly and then hope that you can recall that when it's when it's test time. Also, something that gets beat up pretty badly is this big blob of fat here, which turns out not to actually be a blob of fat. This is another one that's a little bit strange. Most of you are going to find that there is this kind of like a veil that more typically lays across the whole surface of the intestine. This particular structure is called the greater omentum. I think that's on the sheet for you. And the greater omentum kind of distinguishes itself by being thin, as you see it, transparent almost, except for what look like rivers of fat. And I'll say more about that later, but basically, tucked into each one of the centers of those rivers is a blood vessel. And the fat that you see there is basically carried by the blood to this region and literally pushed out through the blood vessel to the surrounding tissue, which creates that rivery look. The rest of this is serous membrane, S-E-R-O-U-S, and serous membrane, of course, is the same thing that the pleural membranes were, the peritoneum that I mentioned is a serous membrane, and so on. So this thing has a number of functions, but its principal function seems to be to store fat. In addition to that, it produces serous fluid, and by that lubricates things. Now, I did tell you, I believe that this shiny surface out here is the parietal peritoneum, and then the shiny surface on the organs themselves is the visceral peritoneum. Same basic tissue, its name changes because of its geography. Parietal on the outside, visceral right on the organ.
Did we just talk about that in the lecture?
Probably did, yeah. There's a lot of overlap now. This is kind of good timing finally, because the lectures are going to coordinate quite well with well, at least with today's lab. Today and one more lab? No, two more labs. Golly, we got to have two more labs. Not sure, I don't have my calendar here. Well, anyway, the intestine is this stuff here, and most people think somehow from the stuff you get out of gory movies and things that if you have that body wall open, that intestine just falls out somehow, and that's just nuts. It doesn't do that at all. It's very, it's reasonably tightly attached to the dorsal wall of the cavity, of the abdominal cavity. And the only way you're going to get, if a hand grenade goes off in its belly, might make a mess of things, but the only way you're going to get this to separate is to do some damage yourself. But this transparent stuff that's holding it all in, this is the mesentery. And as luck would have it, you can see here, again, rivers of fat, plus you can see blood vessels. And that being the case, I'm going to give you some functions for this mesentery that are sort of a little bit contrived, but not so much. There's, I think, 5 or 6 functions I've got for this for you. You can just number them and get it that way. But number 1, well, here. Again, this intestinal tube, because of the muscling in it and so on, this